When I was growing up, I basically grew up watching TV, especially like the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, TLC, and whatnot. I haven't really talked about it, but I was definitely a Malthusian for a long time just because I watched so many nature shows about deforestation and the whales and all that, and it really had a strong influence on me. But once I got into high school, the amount of time I spent watching TV just declined. And then there are periods in college where I literally didn't watch any. And when I'm at work, I really don't watch any. I'll watch YouTube. There are a couple shows that I like, but I probably end up just watching them on DVD or they'll be TiVo'd. When I go home, I'll watch them all at once, but that's pretty much it. But one show that, and it's interesting because the shows that I end up liking now, they're chance encounters. I'll see them advertised, and I never see a show advertised and go, I'm going to watch that. Or at least it's extremely, extremely rare. It's happened once or twice. But typically I cannot get interested enough in a show based on its advertising to make a point to watch it. But if I see it and I like it, I may end up watching it. And this is definitely the case with this show, Gold Rush. Now, you might think, hey, it's a show about entrepreneurs, hard workers, they're going after gold, it's in Alaska, what's not to love? And I agree with all that, but it's just another reality TV show, and I was at no point after I was aware of its existence going to watch it. But lo and behold, at some point last year, flipping through the channels, I came and I saw it. Now, if I'm going to critique the show, it has all the shortfalls, really, of all the reality TV shows. It's kind of become this formula, I think, that the networks have realized that they can save a lot of money because they don't have to invest in all these production costs and elaborate sets. All they need is, a filming crew and somebody who's willing to accommodate them, which always bothers me because you have to assume that these camera crews are compensating the people they're documenting somehow. Like in the famous one, Deadliest Catch, they're not just getting a free ride on the ship, and they're not just eating for free and getting a free room and board. They have to be paying for that at some level, because I don't see how in a show like Pawn Stars, it's great free press. I bet they do a lot of business because they're on TV all the time. I would never even know to go there, but if I ever go to Vegas, I'm sure I'll go to the Golden Pawn Shop just to see, I don't see how people buy more crab because of Deadliest Catch, or if they do, how there's any direct way to account for that increase for the ships that you could be buying crab and it's probably not coming from your favorite crew that you watch every week. But in any event, this reality TV shows, they're scripted. You can tell to an extent. They edit them to produce a narrative. It's kind of annoying to the degree that they try and insert drama where there's not really a lot. The commercials, for the coming up or the next episode, they imply a whole bunch of antagonism that almost never pans out. It's almost never there. That's totally, they try to make a big deal out of little things like a guy waking up late for work or, something like that. So it's contrived, and there's always the question of how, that people alter their behavior, even assuming that it's not completely fake and that they're not having writers decide what's going to happen and everything, which I'm sure does happen sometimes, but I don't have any reason to suspect that that's the case with Gold Rush, but it could be. You still know that the participants alter their behavior for the cameras. The guy who runs, the foreman who's supposedly running the mine, always says frick. But that people out wearing hard hats, working out in the Alaska wilderness don't say frick. It's also interesting. In the first season, they had one crew attempting to mine gold in Alaska. And in the second season, they've diversified to do these two crews in Alaska. And the original crew is now mining in the Klondike, they always say. And the show is always described is no longer called Gold Rush Alaska. It's just called Gold Rush. And the little detail that they make a point to never mention is that the place that they are mining, the Klondike, is in Yukon Territory, Canada. They're not in the United States. And it's interesting because one of the narratives that they are trying to portray here is like this is the American dream or whatever. And they show them even say this is the American dream, and it just would seem ironic that they are in Canada at this point. And so rather than just be frank about it, I think it would still be interesting. They're trying to make a living. They're trying to get gold. Why not just admit that they're in Canada? Why does it have to be that they're in Alaska or whatever? But that's not the point of this video. Those are critiques that you could launch at any reality TV show, and it's perfectly valid in this case. But one of the narratives that is demonstrated, and this has to be something that they either scripted or it's really happening and the producers are choosing to include it, is there's been a running theme, not too overt at first, but much more overt in the second season and the last couple episodes, of the detriment of government regulations. Now this is very significant and unusual. By and large, the media is very conciliatory and laudatory of the government. The vast majority of representations of it are as police or military, where they are lionized and idealized into a completely unrealistic fashion. I mean, the standard, almost universal TV police unit is upstanding, morally unimpeccable, high-functioning, sophisticated, ethically, and yet out like superheroes, just stopping the crimes all the time. Same thing with the military. Same thing with CIA and all that. But even more broad, even non-dramas, even non-fiction, just in the news, the media, the government is predicted. Is portrayed extremely positively, and if you look at shows like Modern Marvels or How It's Made or something, not How It's Made, but like Modern Marvels, when they talk about an industry and they bring up regulations, it's always in the context of regulations make it better. The FDA makes our food safe, or makes heavy equipment safe, or whatever. And regulations, I think, are one of the absolute most terrible, worst things that the government do. I would say that they are even worse than taxes, because they literally prevent and retard consumers and entrepreneurs from getting what they want and serving themselves. I think regulations are worth it. And in the broad sense, even things like minimum wage and all that, those are all regulations also. And they stratify our economy. They prevent it from developing in the ways that it otherwise would, to our detriment. And this can actually destroy a society. A classic example, this isn't the whole reason, this is the whole other video, but in Rome, they had regulations that bread could only cost so much. They subsidized it. And this totally screwed up the production of bread, because it made it too expensive to grow. And so rather than Rome being surrounded by thousands and thousands of hectares of grain production, it moved into production of luxury goods, which is, there's nothing wrong with luxury goods, but it got to the point where Rome was literally starved to death if it didn't have a navy importing grain from Egypt or wherever else, the Black Sea. And when eventually that happened, the population of Rome is amazing. This is a singular example, but you have a city with 1 million people before the Common Era. It just plummets to, I think it reached a nadir at some point of maybe 20 or 30,000 at some point in the Dark Ages, which is cataclysmic in the extreme. I mean, no city ever had such a huge fall, but no city was big enough to fall that much. But that is an example of where regulations can put you. If government regulations tell us that you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that, you can only do activity A and B, well, eventually A and B are going to become exhausted, and the fact that we could never develop B and C. This is another evidence of this is our whole dependence on oil and automobiles that run on internal combustion engines. I don't have anything against internal combustion engines, but it is, practically speaking, because of the regulatory state, impossible to develop alternatives, and it always has been. And the government is basically, hey, you've got an internal combustion engine that's like this, that's fine. You can get, we'll rubber stamp it. You still have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. But if you came out with something that ran in a totally different system, not going to happen. And now we're finding ourselves in a point where potentially, I'm not going to just say this is the case, but potentially, we're on an unsustainable path because of that. Now, bringing it back to Gold Rush. In the first season, this was alluded to a few times. The first instance that I recall is they were just getting set up, ready to go, and all of a sudden this man appears on their site, walking around. They all become very alarmed. They're more or less out in the middle of nowhere. They do have neighbors. There are other people around, but not very many. You wouldn't expect someone to just show up, and this guy is just blatantly walking through their property. Although they're leasing the property, it's not really theirs, but... And the way it's presented is actually as a severe kind of trespass, that this is an aggressive act that, freaks them all out, as it should. And as it turns out, this is a regulator, I think he was a state regulator, and he was coming and saying that they couldn't suck water out of the creek and that they'd have to build a pond or whatever. And they conformed to his, to save the salmon from the silt or whatever. And they okay, it's a headache, but they do it. But I thought it was interesting that they portrayed this man's presence as menacing, at least initially. Now then, you don't see a lot the rest of the first season. Now the second season, the very start, it begins with him saying that he wants to continue to mine in Alaska, but he also wants to get a mine, what they always say in the Klondike, but it's actually in Canada. And his initial plan falls through because he found a place to mine in the Klondike, found a landowner who would lease him an area, and the landowner called him and said, we can't do it because we don't have a permit to get the water. We turned in the permit, but the government office is just behind 6 months and they just can't get it to us. And this is presented as a dream-ending cataclysm. They have already gone out and borrowed all this money. They've made plans to go and mine there, and they did nothing wrong. There's no evidence that they're going to pollute. There's no evidence that it's not like the permits are restricting a resource that's about to run out. It's not a case of, well, they're not giving the permit because there's no more area to go, so that's it. No, they just are bureaucrats and they're slow about it, and they haven't gotten around to it. And I actually missed the next couple episodes, so I don't know. Somehow they resolved it. What ended up happening is their initial claim, they didn't pay the rent on their initial claim in Alaska, and they lost it and went to one of their competitors, and they ended up in the Klondike anyway. I don't know if on the same claim or what. And they go and they mine and they mine and they mine and they mine. And they're really bad at it, apparently, because they're rookies. It's a hard thing to do. There are lots of other interesting things about the show, about the use of capital. They have all this capital equipment, but the fact is, if they can't use it very effectively, it will go to either other uses or to other producers. It's also a lot of stuff about the price of gold, fluctuations in the market. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of implied. It's on the background. The show is focusing on the interpersonal drama and the whole American dream thing, but there's a lot of good economic juice in there if you watch it. But then, towards the end of the second season, which has not ended yet, but I think it's getting close, government regulations become much more overt and antagonistic, and explicitly so. What ends up happening, interestingly, not to the guys in Canada, but to the two crews that they follow in Alaska, they both get visited by the mining regulator, the federal mining regulator, who, totally cliched, is a big fat guy. He even has like a chew in his back pocket. They bleep out his face. He shows up to these two well sites, and he shuts them both down for minutia. For the one, he finds safety hazards, that the mine has been in operation for 26 years. The guy who is really running it, obsessively, it's being run by a 17-year-old kid. Oh, that's another interesting thing. This mine is being run by a 17-year-old kid, and at a couple points, in order to, he builds roads and whatever to excavate certain areas. He rents like huge 40-ton dump trucks. And at one point, the 17-year-old kid is jumping into him, and he's like, "Oh, I wonder if I'm supposed to get a license for this." Oh well, and he drives away with it. And I thought it was wonderful, this complete disregard for whether he's going to do what he needs to do. He's not even going to bat an eye about the government. Anyway, he's not really running the mine. It's really his 91-year-old grandfather who's been running it for 26 fucking years. And this bureaucrat shows up, and he finds little things like, oh, you don't have a railing here, you don't have this, and he goes, you're shut down. You're done. You cannot mine until you fix these things and until you get certified by another bureaucrat who you're going to have to pay a buttload of money. And what's great about it's terrible. I mean, they're trying to make a living. They're spending thousands of dollars a day to get gold so that I can buy it, and the more that they mine, the less I pay. And they're trying to serve me or at the same time getting rich themselves. It's totally mutual exchange, and this bureaucrat just walks in and he just shuts them down. And it's not like he can demonstrate that it's really serious or for their protection. And at one point he even says, with a chuckle, it's just my job to write citations. I mean, literally, that's what he says. Not my job to make you safe. It doesn't say it's my job to make you safe. That's ostensibly the argument that they make why it's justifiable, but that's not actually what he says. And they have to go, and I mean, the 17-year-old complains, like, we have to go and get the government, we have to pay the government to tell us that it's okay to let us start again because the government said we had to. I mean, it's stupid. He says it's stupid. The camera shows it, and the producers, to their credit, they didn't edit all that out. They could have just made it look like it never happened. And so I don't know if the producers have like a libertarian streak or if they just think it's intellectually honest to show what was happening, but they do. On the second well site in Alaska, same deal. He comes on, he's like, you don't have the right safety stuff. He shuts him down. But then he says, you don't have a safety plan or whatever, which apparently they had actually filled out and they had sent in, and then the bureaucracy just never got it back to them. A libertarian couldn't make this stuff up. You ask the government for permission, you do all the right hoops, and they just don't get back to you. And then they come and they burn your ass because you don't have the paperwork they never gave back to you. And the guy who owns that mine, and this is interesting, so this guy, he's kind of depicted as the villain, as some kind of untrustworthy fellow, but he really has a touching story here because he lives in North Dakota and his entire house was destroyed in a flood like that summer. He's out there mining and his wife calls, like, we're going to lose everything. And they did. They lost everything. So all his hopes and dreams are based, and not just his hopes and dreams, his literal financial survival. The status of him, like, not being homeless is based on the success of this gold mine. And then this fat bureaucrat just shows up and says, you're closed because you don't have the paperwork that you sent in, but we just didn't get back to you. And all the little minor safety minutia. And this guy goes berserk. And he starts cussing, they bleep it out. And a couple times he looks at the camera and goes, this is killing jobs, this is killing us, this is killing America, and y'all ought to be mad. He's absolutely right. And I applaud the producers of the show for putting in that was totally accurate, and it's something you never ever see. I mean, as I talked about earlier, the government is almost uniformly depicted as positive, but even greater than that, the regulatory state is almost never even addressed at all. And when it is, it's only in the guise of they're protecting us, they're making our lives better. And to have a show like this that attempts to, perhaps unsuccessfully, but attempts to get us emotionally involved in these characters, and then to show them being harmed by government regulations that are just, in the show it is depicted that they are senseless minutia that have no conceivable basis in actually making anybody safer or helping. It's just a blatant, it's like a highwayman just coming and saying, you gotta pay me for protection. It's the mafia. got to pay me. You got to convince me that you're safe. Never mind the fact that you're okay with it. The workers are okay with it. If they weren't okay with it, they wouldn't be there. You know, the 17-year-old did some things I would not do that I considered very risky. But you know, he was okay with it, and he did it. And so, end of story. Nobody else's business. If I don't think his gold is safe, or I think he's risking his life in the way he produces, I won't buy it from him then. But this, for these bureaucrats to show up and just put a halt to everything. I mean, one guy said this is going to cost me $40,000. The other guy said it cost him not that much, but $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, 2 or 3, something like that. And so the regulatory state is depicted as onerous, if not tyrannical, and absurd. And that's true. And that's the thing is, the regulatory state is not there for consumer protections. That is what it claims to be for. That is what most people imagine it to be for. But it is demonstrably, empirically, if not theoretically, but theoretically also, a form of protectionism. Now, unlike tariffs that protect local national producers from foreign competitors, the regulatory state protects established or favorited local industries over their internal domestic competition. So the Food and Drug Administration protects the big meat packers, the ones that Upton St. Clair was writing his fictional novel about, against local butchers. Because local butchers have a harder time jumping through all the hoops that Armour or Spam or Kraft or Tyson Chicken do. They have the billions or the millions to pay the lawyers to go do the paperwork. The Amish guy who sells his cattle on the side of the road, he can't possibly afford to do that. Now, unfortunately, the state's omniscience is not there, and so they get away with it. But much of the time, I don't know about you, I've purchased wonderful produce products from the gray market, from the Amish market. But the regulatory state is a form of protectionism for big business, for the biggest business, or perhaps for a favorited business. So this might not be the biggest, but if your uncle's the senator or whatever, you might still get a subsidy. And sometimes big businesses do get hurt upon. If they're just not politically in, so Boeing's getting spit on because of this union thing. Although Boeing, I have a lot of issues with because of the military-industrial complex, so I'm not totally sympathetic. But were they, free market, and that's what happened? Yeah. The regulatory state is not for consumer protection; it's for producer protection against competition, and also it's a subsidy because the government regulators are filling the market condition of they're saying, we've certified that this stuff is safe, so they don't have to pay for it. This is how originally all actually started. The meat producers were having issues convincing people that their stuff was safe. Consumers were demanding, not every consumer all the time, but enough to make a difference to know why should I trust the stuff in your can is edible. And so meat producers were beginning to find ways to make this plausible, so they could plausibly claim that it was safe. And then they realized, well, why are we paying for this? Why don't we have Uncle Sam pay for this? And they found willing dupes, if not willing allies, in the likes of Upton St. Clair, socialists generally. I mean, I still have socialists telling me that tariffs are good, whatever. And then eventually became kosher, and now basically everybody except for the libertarians think it's a bad thing. But I'm glad this show showed it. I don't know if a regular audience member would have picked it up on it. Just as a libertarian, I was there, but I was surprised to see it. I mean, and the thing is it played out over several episodes, and the rhetoric of all those involved got consistently more antagonistic towards the government. Like, they are screwing us. And the one guy, he looks right at the camera. This, of course, implies why it's not really reality TV, because you don't. When I'm walking to work, I don't suddenly turn and look off to my side and give an anti-government speech. I'm not that libertarian, but that's what he did, and that's what they showed. The producers could have easily just cut that out and made it sound. And at one point, they showed one of the workers saying something like, "Well, they do actually make people safe," But that was about a 25-second blurb in an otherwise very dramatic representation of a regulatory state ruining their lives, costing them money, perhaps to the point where they go bankrupt or become homeless. And although it's not showing them, they are stopping them from producing gold. So, I mean, we all got to pay more for an ounce now. Now, how much did that affect us? In these three little mines, not very much. But the government's regulating every single gold mine, and it won't even let you mine for half. I mean, for oil, this is huge, man. There's so much oil, we're not even allowed to go after it. And I'm not saying the oil industry is like this free market industry, because there's government-created bottlenecks and oligopolies in the oil industry. But bottom line is we could be producing way more oil than we are. Now, I don't know if it's twice or just 50% or whatever, way more oil. And the government has just said, no, you can't. You can't even try. If you ask me, we would have done it 50 years ago. We'd already be 3 generations in power production past petroleum at this point. And that's just, like I said, the regulatory state retarding the market, retarding society, mainly for protectionism of certain industries. It would be similar to if they outlawed cars to make it really good for blacksmiths. We might still have blacksmiths and horse and buggies. And I would be on here arguing about, if the government hadn't regulated blacksmiths, we'd probably all be driving around in horseless cars. And people would be like, no, you're crazy. That wouldn't exist. I mean, the analogy, I think, is apt. But unfortunately, with that, we could say, well, we'd be in cars instead of horse and buggies. But we can't even say where we'd be without this regulatory state, which is literally retards society. And it has 2 reasons. One reason is the protectionism for selected industries or selected firms. The other is so the government can pat itself on the back and laud itself and say, we're protecting you from your own choices, which, it has to be said, is so conceited and arrogant, especially for people who have all this rhetoric about for the little guy and helping the poor or whatever, and then they come and they're like, oh, but I can tell you that you can't mine gold because, or whatever, because you're not smart enough to come up with a risk assessment for yourself. Oh, so infuriating, but that's where we're at. I don't know if this show is going to change that, probably not, but check it out. It's they run it on, they re-air it repeatedly, so if you ever watch it, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But there you go.